we're going to start at what we think is the beginning. What is social communication? So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to describe what social communication is, and specifically thinking about young children, infants and toddlers. Then I will show you a video where you'll see some examples of children and adults interacting and engaging with each other, and that should help it all come to life. So let's start with what we can observe, what children are doing. So social communication is a group of skills that include watching, listening, and anticipating what people will do. So young children are observing and starting to predict what might happen in routines in their life and what people might do at bath time or when they're singing with their parent. They're also engaging in social interaction with people, responding to it, for instance, if somebody calls their name, or initiating it, running to the door when they hear dad coming home from work. They're also imitating what people around them are doing and saying, and this is very important for learning. They're communicators, so even before they talk, they have various means to communicate. They do so non-verbally through their gaze, so looking up at people to check in with them, or looking around at things in their environment and communicating that way their interest. We can read a lot through their facial expression, and they're also developing gestures such as waving or giving an object. They're also communicating with sounds, so babbling starts early, continues to develop, turns into different vocalizations, and then words start to appear. So why are the children doing this? So these skills allow toddlers to do many things. Get your attention. Also, understand other people's communication. So other people's gestures. If an adult puts out their hand like this, understanding that that is a request for them to give you something. They're starting to understand other people's facial expressions and emotions, and starting to understand words that are commonly used in their everyday activities. They're also communicating what they do and don't want, no, or not shaking their head, and also communicating when they're happy, or when they're a bit frightened or worried, or when they're frustrated. Importantly, they should be sharing what interests them with people in their environment. So all of this, as I've said, starts to develop quite early in infancy through toddlerhood and beyond. So before a child can talk, these are the building blocks, and they're setting the stage for the child to learn to talk and for language to continue to develop, and eventually there's links also to later school success. So all of this is social. That means you need more than one person. So these skills and these opportunities happen primarily during interactions between young children and their parents and caregivers and other children in their lives throughout the day. All right, so I'm going to show you a wonderful video that's from the Baby Navigator website that is going to illustrate some of what I've said and explain why this is relevant and important for today's talk. Okay, I hope that you found that useful and you enjoyed it. I've seen it many times, but I enjoy watching it, and I hope it illustrated some of what I was describing before, and we owe a great thanks to the people at Baby Navigator for allowing us to play it today. So I want to spend a bit more time on two aspects of social communication development that you can observe in children and pay attention to. So the first is gestures. So as we just saw, the development of gestures is integral to early social communication development. And in fact, children usually develop 16 different gestures by 16 months. So that's a handy memory aid, a handy mnemonic, 16 by 16. So this is something that caregivers or early interventionists or early childhood educators can pay attention to and observe in a child once you know what to look for. So I won't go into the nitty-gritty here, but early gestures can include things like giving or shaking the head or reaching for something, or as you see in this wonderful picture with this child, raising her arms, presumably asking to be picked up. So one thing I want to emphasize is that gestures are important for communication, but they're also used for social reasons. So if a child is showing you something that they've just discovered or find to be interesting, or pointing towards something early on, maybe with an open hand, and a bit later they're able to point with an index finger to point out something they're noticing or want to know more about or want you to label, what's that? Well, these are social gestures, and we really want to see this communication and social use of gestures developing in children. So if you follow the link at the bottom of this slide, you'll arrive at what on the website is called a lookbook with wonderful photos illustrating the various gestures that develop between 9 and 16 months of age, and there are some great handouts that you can also download. A second aspect of early social communication development I want to spend just a couple of minutes on is how young children are using objects, how they're using actions with objects. So the infant, the toddler, they're explorers. They're exploring the world around them, they're figuring out how things work, and they're sharing their discoveries, at least we hope they are. So they're learning by doing. And while this is happening, they're learning the words that go with the objects, the actions, the people, and the events in their lives. So again, based on research and by various groups, we know that this starts early, and you can expect about 16 different actions with objects by 16 months. So that mnemonic again. So these actions with objects, might have said that wrong. So 16 actions with objects by 16 months. And this is going to progressively develop to become more functional. So using objects such as putting shapes in a puzzle or a sippy cup in the child's mouth. And there's going to be some pretend play that's going to start from this. So pretending to feed the doll. So this is another aspect that you can observe. And as we've seen, these developments are all linked. So the early development of actions with objects is linked to the development of play, thinking, imagination, and all of that also supports language. There's another link at the bottom of this slide that'll get you to another great lookbook with wonderful photos and a layout of how these actions with objects develop between 9 and 16 months of age, and some handouts you can download. All right, so what if social communication development is delayed? So if that happens, then the child is missing out on opportunities to learn from these social interactions with their parents and caregivers or with other children in their environment. And that's making it more difficult for parents to support their development because there's fewer opportunities to respond to the child and to follow the child's focus. So together, this can limit later language learning and social connectedness. So a toddler with social communication delays is missing out on many learning opportunities every day, and this can have a cumulative effect on their development. So why? Why would there be a delay? Well, sometimes it's just that, and the child just needs a little bit more time. In other circumstances, a social communication delay might be expected to a certain degree because it's associated with a known condition. So, for instance, if a child has already been diagnosed with Down syndrome or had cerebral palsy or was born prematurely. But in other cases, a social communication delay can be a sign of autism spectrum disorder. We don't always know why there is a delay, but regardless, we should be paying attention if we notice that there is a social communication delay. So paying attention is well and good, but what do we do? So the first step for anyone is to find out more. So for parents, it can be difficult to know whether they should be concerned or how much so. And early interventions and other providers may also think that they'd like to know more about social communication development. So we're pointing you to what we think is a rich and reliable source, the Baby Navigator website, from which I showed you that clip a few minutes ago. So this is a reliable source based on many years of research work, and there are many videos, handouts, lots of this is completely free. You'll find what they're calling social communication growth charts. So what in the video they referred to as the milestones that matter most. So you can look up between the ages of 7 and 24 months what you might expect with respect to development in areas such as language, play, and social interaction. You'll also find more information on social communication delays and red flags for autism. There's also resources for suggestions of how to support social communication development in everyday activities. So, once you know more, if anyone is concerned about a child's social communication development, we think it's important to seek a general developmental assessment from a pediatrician or an early childhood professional. So this would result in a screen. So screens lead not to diagnoses, but to indications or suggestions. So if there's a positive screen, what that means is there may be a need for further assessment. So here we just put two examples of screeners that could be used for this general developmental assessment: the infant-toddler checklist and the ages and stages questionnaires. There could be others. So if that screener suggests that there might be a delay, then it's likely that the pediatrician or the early childhood provider will use another tool that's still a screener, but that's more specific about autism. So then if that screen is positive, then that suggests that further assessment is recommended, and in this case, assessment that's autism specific. So here is an example of such a screener, the Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, the MCHAT. And this is the screener that we used in the PACE coaching project, and Pat will tell you a bit more about that later. So if we're still in the screening stages, there's no diagnoses. But if someone is concerned and screeners are saying that there is a possibility of autism, then we recommend that a parent or caregiver ask a physician or a pediatrician for a referral to BCAN. BCAN is the BC Autism Assessment Network, and they're the publicly funded agency that's responsible for diagnostic assessment around autism. Now, asking for this referral is going to take a little while, and then there's also going to be a wait time before your child, you would be contacted to actually receive an autism assessment. More on that in a second. But in the meantime, we suggest that you contact Autism Information Services of BC, also known as ACE BC. They can provide information and support. So what kind of supports or information? Well, they can tell you more about what's involved in the diagnostic process. They can tell you about autism funding if and when your child did receive such a diagnosis. Importantly, They can point you to services that are available in your region now until the child receives an assessment for autism, and regardless of how that would eventually turn out. So why are we encouraging you to seek out autism assessment if there are concerns or red flags for autism? Because there's a big gap between what could happen and what generally does happen. So on the one hand, we know that the early signs of autism begin to unfold between 9 and 16 months of age. We also know, because there's been a lot of research done, that experienced professionals can be considered to reliably diagnose autism as early as age 2 in some children. But what actually happens is different. So we have data here for, these are Canadian data going back to 2015. They're the most recent complete data we have access to, and there isn't reason to think that things have changed very much. So you see that among Canadian children that were diagnosed with autism before age 17, in 2015, only 19%, so that's about 1 in 5, were diagnosed by age 3, and only a bit more than half were diagnosed by age 6. That means that many children are going undiagnosed until later preschool years or even by school entry. So by and large, there's quite a few reasons to act early. Not addressing a concern only leads to delays in the assessment and the diagnostic process. Currently, the wait time for a diagnostic assessment through BCAN is 78 weeks, which is a year and a half. Now that's increased a bit due to COVID, but it has been quite long for many years now, so it's not a new problem. Also, in BC, parents cannot access autism funding for early intervention without a diagnosis. You can't get autism services unless there's an autism diagnosis. As I said a few seconds ago, we still encourage you to seek out services and supports, but they're going to likely be much more limited until you get a diagnosis, if and when your child were to get one. So in most cases, early identification leads to early intervention and to better outcomes. Now, there's another important message here that I want to emphasize. It's never too late. So if you're a parent of an older child, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and you have concerns or questions, we do encourage you to seek supports and services. What we're saying, though, is if anyone is concerned early, we encourage you to act early. I want to now let a parent speak. This is Coral, and she was a parent participant in the PACE coaching project. And she's going to tell us about her experience and why she felt that it was important not to wait.
I got that a lot. He's only 2, you should just wait and see. But then I like to read, so I would do some reading while I couldn't sleep. And everything was like, oh, you know, the earlier, the better. If there's a problem, the earlier you can get help, the more effective it can be. And so I just had this, I got this thing in my head, like the time is just whizzing by and he's going to be in kindergarten and I'm going to be hit with this wall of like, well, it's too late for this now. You could have helped him sooner. And then PACE was dropped in my lap, all the help I couldn't get any other way.
So, what's the bottom line here? Again, although it's never too late, if you are concerned, a concerned parent of a toddler or preschooler, or someone else that is concerned about that child, we really encourage you to replace wait and see, which is not a good option, with do and see, which we think is actually a better choice. And the first step is to seek support from the Health Unit, the Child Development Center, or the Aboriginal Friendship Center in your region. So you might be wondering, what does this have to do with parent coaching? That's why you came, right? To hear about parent coaching. So Coaching supports parents to use evidence-based strategies in daily routines to support a child's social communication development. So this can be effective for any child with social communication delay. There's been research done with children with Down syndrome, Rett syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, also children who are waiting for an autism diagnostic assessment, and after diagnosis of autism. So I'm going to hand it over now to Pat, who is going to tell you more about what is parent coaching.
It's really important, we think, that to lay the foundation for parent coaching by thinking about the importance of social communication, because that is, as Paula said, usually the focus of parent coaching. And I want to spend a bit of time distinguishing parent coaching from other types of parent-child support, all of which are valuable in their own right, but none of which are the same as parent coaching. So one way of offering parents and children support is through parent education. Parent education is really what we're doing today. We're giving you information. We're showing you videos and we're talking to you, but you're not practicing anything. We're not showing you anything. We're not modeling anything. We're just giving you information. So we hope this will be useful, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be spending our time doing it. And there are lots of good parent education workshops that are available through ACT and through other venues that are knowledge focused. The idea is to give parents and professionals information of some sort. So that's one type of parent-child support. Another type of parent-child support is skills focused. Here, we're talking about several different types of what is often referred to as parent training. Now, some people call some of these things that I'm about to talk about parent coaching, but I'm going to call them parent training because there are different flavors of under that umbrella. As you can see in this flow chart, there are 3 different types of skills-focused parent training. So the first type is what we refer to as an expert model of parent training. What does that look like? Well, in an expert model, typically an interventionist, who could be anybody, an infant development professional, an early childhood professional, a speech-language pathologist, whoever, I'm calling all of those people interventionists, identifies a new behavior that the child needs to learn, sometimes, perhaps even often, with some amount of parent input, then explains a teaching strategy to the parent. Here's how you can get your child to do this, either verbally and or in writing, usually both. The interventionist then interacts with the child to model the strategy while the parent watches. And because the interventionist is pretty good at what he or she does, the child usually engages in the behavior at that point. And then the interventionist encourages the parent to try the strategy at home or wherever over the next time period. So that's what this model looks like in writing. Let me show you what it looks like in pictures. Here we have the interventionist and the child. The interventionist arrives in the child and the family's home, usually with a bag of toys. The interventionist and the child interact while the parent watches, and there's some interaction between the interventionist and the parent, but mostly interventionist is modeling, and then the parent and child try to figure out how to do that at home. Okay, we refer to that as an expert model of parent training. So I want to play 2 videos now. One is from one of our training facilitators or coach trainers, Michaela Jelen, and one is from one of our parent coaches, Emily Moss, and both of them talk about, the downside of an expert model. This is Michaela Jelen.
The challenge with, I think the traditional expert model of support is parents, while they might be in the room, and they're watching an expert working with their child, and there's so many things that can happen, such as, wow, look at how she's doing that. I can never be able to do that. Wow, she's the child is, I don't know, talking with her SLP, but she never does that with me. Or they need a break, so they completely check out and they just sort of, they're on their phone or they're reading a magazine while the expert is doing their work with their child, and then they leave. And I think as clinicians who are focused on family-centered practice, we are really good at writing notes, do this, do this, do this, do this at home. But the reality is, if we're not actually checking in at a deep level with parents about, do you understand these skills, which are very second nature to all of us because we've been doing them for a long time, but to a parent who perhaps this is all brand new, it might not make sense what these things that are written down mean. And we're also not checking in with, does this sound like something you're able to do and feels meaningful to you for whatever's going on in your life right now?
And here's Emily talking about her experience prior to PACE coach training.
Probably subconsciously when I first started working, because I love playing with kids and that part has always come very naturally to me. I think I just naturally kind of took on the role of modeling and showing parents what to do by me doing it. So I would play with the kid and I would say, I'm doing it because of this. And I think that was a disservice to people because it left people thinking that only I could do it that way, or I brought these toys, so they need this specific toy to be able to do it the way that Emily does. And I feel like with parent coaching, it's really opened up my ability to let the parents be the parents and come up with their own ways of working with their own items and working with their children within their own relationship and kind of developing these skills and techniques that we're working on, but in a really organic and maintainable way where they can keep doing that every day. And it's not just me coming in once a month and showing them how to do it and then saying, okay, good luck, try and be like me while I'm gone.
Okay, so it's not that isn't a useful model of parent training, it's that it's a limited model of parent training. So what's the second model? Well, this one we call the enhanced expert model, which starts out very, very much like the expert model, but then has a couple of additional pieces. So here, again, the interventionist identifies a new behavior that the child needs to learn, explains the teaching strategy to the parent, and models the strategy while the parent watches. But now there's two more pieces. Now the parent rehearses or tries the strategy with the child while the interventionist is in the room, and the interventionist can then provide feedback to the parent about what went right, what went wrong, how to do it slightly differently, all of that kind of good stuff. Many people refer to this model as behavioral skills training, which does have some research evidence. I mean, it's not that this isn't a good model, it's just not a complete model, and it's not the same as parent coaching. So here we see this one in visual form. The parent watches the interventionist work with the child around a particular strategy, and then the interventionist watches the parent and child try to do that same thing and provides feedback, and then the parent works on that at home, presumably over the next chunk of time. Okay, so you can see that this is an enhanced expert model, but here's what we know about this. We know that expert-guided practice is not enough for generalization and continued use of strategies. Here's a lament that we hear from many interventionists who use the enhanced expert model. I've been working with this parent for months, and every time I see them, we practice this skill together. I don't know why they can't do it themselves by now. Well, there's some reasons they can't do it themselves by now. One is that model still places the interventionist in the role of an expert, without necessarily acknowledging that the parent comes with a huge amount of expertise as well. Interventionist modeling is still included here as a core teaching strategy. And while that might seem like a really swell idea on the surface, what it does potentially is deliver the message to the parent that this person, this skilled professional, can get my child to do things and that I haven't been able to get my child to do. So the parent might be reluctant to practice in front of the intervention because of concern about doing it wrong or worry about being judged. Or perhaps when the parent does practice in front of the interventionist, the child doesn't do it as well as he or she did it for the interventionist. So now the parent's embarrassed. It can be a problem, right? So modeling, although it seems like a good idea, as I said before, on the surface, can be a real stumbling block here in this model. So what's a third alternative? The third alternative is parent coaching. Parent coaching is not the same as the expert model. It's not the same as the enhanced expert model. And in this next video, Michaela Jelen explains what she calls the heart of parent coaching.
At the heart of parent coaching is this deep understanding that parents are indeed experts on their child, and the parent coach is an expert in the specific content. So the reason that the parent sought the parent coach out. And then these two types of expertise, so expertise on the child, expertise in particular content, are brought together in a collaborative relationship that's based on trust and mutual respect.
How is parent coaching different? Parent coaching is characterized by a number of things. First of all, the coach and the parent are equal partners, absolutely equal partners. The coach focuses on the parent's priorities and goals. The coach doesn't say, here's what I think we need to work on. The parent says that. During parent-child interactions, the coach observes what the parent does in the interaction with the child and reinforces success or any approximation of success and supports the parent, here's the critical piece, to reflect on the interaction, think about how it went, self-critique, and then try new skills as needed. So the emphasis is on guided practice by the parent with coach feedback, but with very limited or sometimes no coach modeling at all. Modeling is used only when essential. So let me give you a visual of this one. It's quite different. The parent and child decide what to work on in the session together. That's the initiation phase. And then there's this cycle of the parent interacting with the child, the parent coach observing that interaction, and then the two of them reflecting together on how it went and providing feedback back and forth as they modify the strategy and probably try it again. And that cycle might repeat 2 or 3 times within a coaching session until the point where the session is ready to end and the parent and child together think about how the parent might use those skills during the interim period between then and the next coaching session. That's a very different kind of interaction than in an expert or an enhanced expert model. It's hard to explain this until you see it or until you experience it. So I want to have one of our parent coaches, Karen Hanford from the Queen Alexandra Center, who is both an SLP and was trained in the project as a parent coach, talk about how coaching builds on the firm foundation of family-centered practice and reflective listening that's always been at the root of early intervention. Karen Hanford.
The idea of coaching and family-centered practice and reflective listening has always been a part of early intervention. And I think a lot of people do integrate a lot of those ideas. So where the PACE coaching project made a real difference to me was around the structure was quite different, the formalizing of the goals, and settling on one topic at a time was quite different, and shutting down my idea of bringing up suggestions and really hearing what the parent wanted to learn, and then bringing my knowledge in and matching. And that's how it grew really well upon the foundations of early intervention and family-centered practice.
Now listen to Alexis Van Newkirk, another SLP who was trained as a parent coach, and she reflects in this video on how the PACE coach training augmented her existing practice with many different types of children and families. This is Alexis.
I came away from the training, funnily enough, just with greater empathy, I think, for what parents maybe go through when they are working on improving their own or trying to change their behaviors to help their child. I think that there were moments in that training where, in the training where I had, empathy for parents, that because going into the training, I had 15 years of experience working as an SLP, and yet I was being asked to change my behavior and to do things a little differently. And I had moments where I felt like, depending on what the dynamic was, but sort of like a little bit of resistance almost, or frustration, or probably all coming from this place of like, I don't know what I'm doing. Isn't kind of I'm out of my comfort zone.
So what does the research say about parent coaching? Well, we know from some research that parent coaching may not be the best fit for all parents and children, but it should certainly be one of the available options. So it's good that there are other models of parent training, because if it's not a good fit for a family, there are other options. But we also know from the research that parent coaching absolutely requires a different skill set than other types of parent training. It's not just another name for the same thing, and it is real therapy. So I want to play a couple more videos. In this next two videos, you'll hear Mary McKenna, one of our training facilitators, and you'll also hear Denise Watson, the program coordinator at the Queen Alexandra Center, reflect on both of these issues, not just another name for the same thing, and parent coaching as real therapy. Here's Mary.
And many people do equate parent coaching with parent training. I think that's probably the biggest confusion is that they think that they are doing parent training, but they actually label it as parent coaching. And so I've had people say to me, isn't it the same thing? And the short answer is no. People who are doing the parent training are working with families. They are supporting families in learning strategies with their kids. They are definitely doing that, right? The very important difference is that partnership. And so as a coach, is you need to be very flexible and adaptable.
And Denise Watson.
Sometimes families have felt that it isn't real therapy, that real therapy is doing something to fix their child. And so I see this as enhancing that relationship between the family and the therapist, and not only building confidence in the therapist, but in the family, that this is real support and it is real therapy, and it can make sustainable differences both in their attachment relationship with their child and in the development of skills.
One more time, I want to emphasize this. What about parent coaching for children who don't have autism? Paula said this before, but I want to reiterate it because it's really important. Parent coaching is not just effective for children at risk for or diagnosed with autism. It's also been used successfully with parents and with young children with other kinds of social communication delays, as you see here. And it is a practice that can be used across a wide range of disabling conditions. We're almost out of time for this session, so I want to end it by introducing you to one of our co-investigators, Dr. Lori Vismara, who's done a lot of the research on the Early Start Denver model and also was support to our training facilitators especially during the early stages of the project. And she's led actually some of this non-autism research. And she talks in this next clip about the three main components of parent coaching, regardless of who the target child and family is. Dr. Lori Vismara.
I thought of three things that I think make a difference when it comes to coaching. The first is to ask questions about what a provider or a family member believes is important to their values, to their culture, to how they currently think about early intervention, how they might use the techniques or strategies with their child or a child whom they support inside the family unit. So asking questions to find out what a person knows, what a person currently does, what's important to a person for their value system, their priorities, and just how they think about something. And once we ask the questions, then listening to their answers to really take in their information, to help them feel like they have a voice in the process. And then the third step is to go forward with that information, to plan and collaborate together on how to enact a strategy, an activity, an idea that moves the person closer towards that desired outcome.